What we are looking at today is basically just a whirlwind about TRC3 submissions. And the reason we thought we'd do this is because we have had other more in-depth ones, but we haven't had a more comprehensive one. So if there's anything here that you want to know more about, you can either use the Q&A session at the end of this, or we can point you to some of the more exhaustive webinars on our website later if you'd like. But basically, this is the TRC3 submission essentials. We're not going to talk about what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually is, but basically, how do you get your case submitted to the Third Truth and Reconciliation Commission? So basically, the three things that we're going to look at is why you should submit, how to submit, and then the bulk of this is what to include in your submission. So with that in mind, basically, why should I submit a case to the TRC3? And just for your awareness, we will be sending a copy of these slides out to you. So feel free to take notes, not take notes, but everything on the slides will be sent to you as you see them. But basically, the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is at its core, just an investigation into human rights violations. And thanks to the work of the Danish Korean Rights Group for the past 10 years and Co-Root in Korea, two nonprofits that we are very closely associated with, they've been able to have international adoptions recognized as part of the TRC. And this started back in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission 2, which ran from 2020 to 2025. And now with the onset of the Third Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this investigation into the human rights violations in the international adoption industry is going to be looked at again under TRC3. So why should you submit a case to the TRC3? Well, because you think maybe, hey, you know what? I've got a boilerplate story where I was abandoned in some public space. I was found, was taken to an orphanage, and then I was saved by being adopted into a family in the Western world. So, but that's a boilerplate story, and you know what? Honestly, if you have that, chances are your adoption records were fabricated in order to be able to get you out of the country. Now, because of this, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission can also look at, hey, you know what? The name on your records, your birth name or the birth date on your records, they might be fabricated. I know mine are, because again, I had that same boilerplate narrative I just said to you, but turns out that the date on my records, my birth date, is actually about 14 months before I was actually born. So these are things that, hey, well, do you really want to know when your actual birthday is? If you don't know what it is now, TRC might be able to uncover that. They'll have a lot of power, legal power in order to be able to go to these different organizations and be able to request records that you and I cannot do. So, but on a broader scale, it's about being part of a larger narrative. It's about making sure that all of these adoption practices that were illegal comes to light. It's about making sure that your case becomes part of the history and becomes a part of the voice for justice in this world. Because basically, if we don't stand up now and say, hey, look into our stories, what will happen is history will repeat itself and others after us will end up going through the same pain and trauma that many of us went through. I was about to ask David, our IT guru, to advance to the next slide when I realized I actually am sharing the screen. So I'll advance to the next slide. Okay, so you say, hey, you know what? There's not a lot of information in my files. Is it really worth me submitting? Because what can they actually investigate? Well, I sort of thought that at the beginning because I had basically two health records in mind that were both done like 3 months apart by the adoption agency that I went through, which was Holt. And that was basically the sum total of what I had at the time. Uh, but and so I thought, well, they wouldn't be able to really find anything more, but that's not really the case. In the So I submitted back in 2022 under TRC2. So in the 4 years since I first submitted my case to them, there's been a lot of information that's come to light about my case that has made it a lot more compelling for them to look at. One was the mismatch of uh, my birth date, which meant that according to my adoption records, I was actually found abandoned 9 months before I was actually born. So that's a bit of a problem. And then another one is that I was actually supposed to be under a period of special protection until like September 74. And what had happened is by August 74, I was actually flying to the US to be adopted when I wasn't even supposed to start that whole process until a month after I arrived. So these are things that I've been able to uncover and have shared with TRC. But initially, I didn't think there was much that they could look at. But now, having looked at things a lot more things have been coming to light. And remember, there's so basically, if you suspect there's been any illegal activities, any fraudulent records, or anything like that, absolutely have the TRC look into your case. And what we say is no case is too small as long as there's some sort of evidence. And it doesn't I mean, sometimes the lack of documentation can be evidence itself. So, for example, in my case, I was found abandoned behind Seoul City Hall. Okay. But you know what? There's no police report that's there that said, hey, you know what? This baby was found. It's literally one line on my adoption records. Uh, and then, so there's no documentation supporting that statement. Another thing is that, so basically, I forgot, but that's okay. But that was an example of, uh, the lack of evidence doesn't is itself is a form of evidence that something's happened. I remember the second bit now. So there's supposed to be a search for birth family that happens once a baby's been or a child's been found abandoned. Okay, and so there must be some sort of notice, some sort of record that the that there had been a search, a good faith search, to try to find your birth family. I don't have that, and honestly, I of the hundreds and hundreds of adoptees that I've helped over the years, I don't think I've come across that once. So uh, again, that's because they don't have that, they can't show that they actually were following the law. So if you submit, what can you hope for? Well, one, you can hopefully have access to our true files and identities. One of the things that people don't want you to know in the adoption industry is that they actually kept two sets of records. One, which was your deportation records, which was basically how do we get you out of the country as quickly and efficiently as possible so we can make the money. And that's the records that have been shared with the adoptive families and adoptive agencies, stuff like that. But they also kept a second set of records for most of the individuals. And basically, that contains the true information. And over the years, I know of about a dozen people who have accidentally had their adoption agencies send them those records. So basically, uh, there's proof that, hey, you know what? And through these records, they were able to find their biological family and stuff. So because of this, we do know that there are two sets of records, and TRC2, when they were looking at adoption records, were able to access the second set of records for a number of the submissions. But and then the second thing is that, hey, you know what? Because of TRC2 that's happened, that documented a number of human rights violations that we'll cover in a future webinar. But basically, there's been a bit of an uproar in South Korea about the international adoptions. And basically, we're starting to see the tide turn there in terms of the average Korean's attitude towards international adoptions. And so, what we're hoping is that this will trickle into the government and that the government will start doing something to prevent international adoptions in the future. And then finally, it's about there were a number of people that made a lot of money off of us, and they did so illegally. And so it's about identifying those people and making sure that they are held to account. Okay. Now, these are the primary things that we're hoping for. What some people are looking for is, let's say, hey, restoration or reunion with birth families and stuff. We can't promise any of that. Okay, that may happen at a later date, but that's not one of the focus of the TRC. TRC is purely an investigation into human rights violations, so that we can use that as a basis for any future actions that might include restoration. So how do you submit to the TRC3? Okay, you can choose to submit on your own, or you can submit through the Danish Korean Rights Group. And why the DKRG, we'll cover that later. But basically, you have to decide, hey, do I want to submit on my own, or do I want to submit through the DKRG? Regardless of how you submit, you need to do the next four things, which is start gathering your documents from your receiving country. For most of you, that will be either the US or Canada. And you don't have to worry about the records in Korea because, like I've been saying, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission can go and subpoena those records directly from the different agencies. And like I say, they'll have access to a wider set of documents than what you and I will have access to. So, but they won't have any access to, let's say, your adoption records in the US and stuff like that. So that's what they need so that they can start identifying discrepancies between the, let's say, the US or Canadian records versus what's contained in the Canadian or in the Korean records. So start gathering your documents there. I'll talk to you about where you can gather them from. You want to build your adoption timeline, identify any red flags in your timeline, and then finally write your personal statement. And I would say to do things in that order. So first thing we'll cover is how to submit on your own. Basically, we've got a number of different embassies or consulates in the US, and they cover all of the geographic region of the US as well. So for me, I'm based in Minneapolis, so my closest consulate would be Chicago. But basically, go to the website of your consulate. They'll give you instructions. Most of them have been harmonized. So basically, they're almost identical instructions across the different consulates, but there are some slight nuances we've discovered. And, like David is in the Atlanta consulate, or covered under the Atlanta consulate, and we found that they're a much friendlier bunch than, let's say, a different consulate, which I won't name because I don't want to disparage any of them. But Atlanta's been really welcoming to us. So, but go to them, to their website, because they each have their own website. There will be two forms on there, the English form and the Korean form. They will either be Word or PDF or something called Han Office. Okay, and I think the file extension is HWP. But we've looked at the forms across the different consulates, and they're basically the same. So if you want the Word document, you can download that. If you want the PDF and print it out and fill it out manually, you can do that. But download the English form and complete it. And now download the Korean form, but you don't have to complete that, okay? So, and I'll tell you why you need that one though. But then you need to schedule an appointment at the embassy or consulate to submit your case, because they will only do that in person because they need to see your ID and stuff like that. So what you have to do is print out all your paperwork and bring it to the appointment, including the blank Korean form. Because what we found is that some of the people who have been submitting through the consulate, and mind you, this is a new thing under TRC3. Under TRC2, you could only do it through co-route and DKRG, but under TRC3, you can do it directly through a consulate. But we've been told by a few adoptees that the English form was fine, but that they needed the Korean form to actually be signed. I think that's a misunderstanding with the consulate understanding in terms of the process, but as long as you have the Korean form, it doesn't hurt because then you can sign it and you haven't wasted a trip. But basically, you won't have to fill that out, just the English form, but you might need to sign the Korean form, and the consulate will be able to tell you where to sign. So how do you submit via the DKRG? It's a little easier. So basically, there's a participation form for TRC3. Basically, if you send an email, it'll send you a back link where you can fill out the form. You then need to create a PDF of your case as well as the form, and then email all of that plus a copy of your ID to the DKRG. And then the DKRG will submit to the TRC on your behalf. Okay. Now, some of the people are, well, why don't we talk about the benefits first? So why should you do it through DKRG? Well, one, we've got a team of people who will manage your case from start to finish. There are regular updates via email and Zoom meetings. I think the Zoom meetings are either currently like monthly or something like that. They can help you write your case summary and personal statement. And this is really important, and we'll talk about the importance of the personal statement later. But basically, without this, some of the cases might be in danger of being not accepted. And of the 356 cases or 367 cases that were under TRC2, they did manage to get them all accepted. There were a few that were going to be rejected, but DKRG worked on the personal statements to get them accepted. So they can demand the deeper investigations by police and other bodies. They also already have the relationships with TRC investigators and the parliament members in Korea. And then we'll talk about the data and privacy laws. But again, your case, and I cannot stress this enough, your case will become part of a larger narrative based on identified patterns and years of experience. So basically, what DKRG and USKRG and CKRG have done is through the work that we've done over the years is identified, hey, you know what, this is a systemic issue, and therefore it's not just your personal case, but your personal case plus the systemic issues. Uh, and then finally, the KRGs can provide some Korean language support related to your case. So whether it's like follow-up emails that you don't know how to answer in Korean or something. I mean, for myself, I had my investigator in TRC2 uh, spoke English very well, so we just communicated back and forth in English. But sometimes there might be a form or something that might need some. So GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation, which came into effect, I believe, in 2018 or 19 in the EU. I spent about 5 years helping companies prepare for that. It was a lot of fun, and that was sarcasm. But basically, the GDPR is one of the strongest data privacy uh, rules that I have ever come across. And what they're doing is making sure that one, your privacy's or your data is not going to be used without your permission in ways that you never intended it to. So let's say you're applying for car insurance, you provide information based on that. They can then take your information and plug it into, let's say, ChatGPT, and then start using it for other purposes. Okay, it can only be used for in relation to you getting a car insurance policy. Okay, so that's one of the protections. Another is, the right to remember or right to forget. So basically, if you say, hey, you know what, I don't want you having any of my data left anymore, I want you to remove it all. They have to, within 30 days, remove any data that you shared with them and stuff like that. So GDPR is really a strong law, and it's much more stringent than anything that, let's say, Canada, the US, or Korea has, which is why GDPR was adopted by the TKRG. All of this data will be anonymized in any reporting, so people aren't going to say, hey, you know what, Michelle said this on this day. So basically, in any reporting that happens outside of your case-specific issues, all of your information will be anonymized. And on top of that, uh, I know some people have been a bit nervous about, hey, you know what, should I submit to TRC3 with all of this immigration stuff going on in the US? Will it impact me and stuff? What we're telling you is nobody will know that you submitted your case to the uh, KRGs or TRC3 unless you specifically choose to tell them that yourself. Okay? Because we won't tell people that you submitted your case, and the TRC3 won't tell anyone either. So that's why you should submit and how you should submit. What to submit though? So what should you include in your submission? And we're going to cover these in order because this is the most logical way to do this. So basically the US adoption records or Canadian adoption records. I always forget about our neighbors to the north. I apologize. I love Canada. I just am very US centric. So US adoption records, your timeline, your personal statement, and any supporting material. And I'll talk about supporting material later. But with your US adoption records, there are 4 areas where you can gather them from: your parents, your adoption agency, US Customs and Immigration Service, or county courthouse. And I'll tell you a bit about the different types of records that each of these will contain. So with your parents, they might have your US adoption records, they might have your health records from the Korean Adoption Agency, certainly your travel certificate or passport. I believe between 74 and 75, they changed it. So I could be wrong, but 74 and before you had a travel certificate, 75 and after you had a passport. But I do know that I had a travel certificate in 74. My brother had a passport in 75. So then there's the vaccination records. So that would allow you to get admitted into the US or Canada. Your They might have a US birth certificate for you that was made at the time of your adoption, naturalization certificate, and any other miscellaneous correspondence. Like, and my parents had a letter from Holt that said, "Hey, you know what? Don't forget to make your child a U.S. citizen." And thankfully, they listened to that, so I was naturalized when I was 9 years old. So with the adoption agency, they'll have your adoption records, but they'll also have your home interviews and assessments. So basically, they'll done a number of things in terms of assessing to make sure that your birth family, or sorry, your adoptive families were, um, let's say, okay to adopt. So I got to see a lot of the um, interviews that they did with my parents and then the write-ups. And stuff like that. There was also a copy of, let's say, my Korean health records and other miscellaneous correspondence there. With USCIS, when I did this, I had like 65 pages come back from them, but I did mine back in 2022, and all 65 of my pages were completely unredacted. What we found these days is that some of the records have come back, 75% redacted and stuff. Under the current administration, they've been a lot more restrictive in terms of what they're releasing to the adoptive person. And we tell you on our website, USKRG.org, different ways where you can try to minimize these redactions. But basically, USCIS will have a copy of your immigration records, like your visa applications and stuff like that. They'll also have a copy of your claim paperwork. And there's four things that they required. There was the certificate of guardianship, the certificate of orphanhood, family register, and statement of guardianship. So basically, the certificate of guardianship is, hey, you know what? I, I am the guardian of this child. So I had one of those. And then that was like created in April of 2000 or April 1974. And then less than a month later, they relinquished it so that they could send me over to the US to be adopted. So I don't think that they actually took guardianship seriously in my case. It was basically just a legal thing. But basically, the certificate of guardianship is, hey, I'm the guardian, and then the statement of guardianship is the one that says, hey, I relinquish my guardianship. The certificate of orphanhood, if you were abandoned, and then a family register, which is called a hojuk. And unfortunately, there there were two hojuks most Korean adoptees had. One was their original hojuk, which had all their information, and then there was what's called the orphan hojuk, which was created to facilitate your adoption overseas. Now, uh, what happened to me was when I went to live in Korea in 2000, I applied for my F4 visa so I could live and work over there. And at the time, the person who was in charge of the F4 visas, whenever he saw two hojuks in the system for the same person, they'd remove and delete the first one and only keep the orphan one. So for myself, my original one was like lost and gone forever. And then I never got a certificate of orphanhood. So there's that. But anyway, your naturalization documentation, if you were naturalized, or for those of you born after 1983, you are then able to get a certificate of citizenship. So you wouldn't have to go through naturalization, but you would still have to apply for your certificate of citizenship. So basically, county courthouse. When I did this, I had about 25, 30 pages that were there. And so basically, this is the one that processed my adoption. And they also had my Korean paperwork, but they had a lot of court records related to the adoption itself, to the court date, and the hearing and stuff. So uh, they do have stuff that USCIS does not have. And then finally, there are other things. This is the supplemental. So maybe, so for myself, when I came here, I was in very poor shape, and my family ended up having to bring me in and out of hospital for the first year that I was in the US. So if you had any medical records there, I tried, but there was a statute of limitations. So it was 25 years of holding, and then after that, they just got rid of them. So I didn't know that, and they got rid of mine. But then there's written statements as well by, let's say, your adoptive parents or anybody else that might be able to attest to some of the facts. And then finally, don't underestimate this one, photos. So this is a picture of me on my arrival to the US. And what you'll notice in that picture is that both of my wrists are bandaged. Uh, and that's because I had deep, fresh scars on both of my wrists that weren't recorded anywhere in my records. And I still have the scars from those wrist wounds today. But basically, I could show this and say, hey, you know what? This is evidence that, hey, you know what? I have this damage. And then when I went to Korea in March of last year and met with my TRC investigator, I was actually able to show him the wrists or the scars on my wrists and stuff. But these photos show what I was like at the time that I arrived, and then a month later, there was a photo of me, and I still had the uh, bandages on my wrists. So now that's the adoption records and supplemental material. Now we talk about creating your timeline. Basically, what I say to people is start in order, start with your birth and then take records, and then list every document in order, every important date, like, hey, this is when the time I was taken into the adoption program. This is the time that I was matched with my parents. This is the date that I was actually sent to the US. So one of the things that was really interesting for me was my parents had indicated that they would be open to adopting a Korean child. The very next day, I entered into the Holt adoption program. But it was really interesting because they already had a picture of me at that point. But so there's a lot of discrepancies and stuff like that. But this is why the dates are so important and be able to just document things. And what I found was that I was able to find a lot of patterns and stuff that I didn't notice before. And this is not an easy task. So when I did this, I ended up spending about good 8 hours really focused on doing nothing but this, going through my records, cross-referencing, and checking all the dates and stuff. So you can note any gaps, overlaps, any contradictions. So for me, contradiction for me is that so Holt says I came to the orphanage on as soon as I was found. My orphanage says, hey, you know what? I was found, and then 14 months later, I was actually brought to the orphanage. So there's a clear discrepancy there in terms of dates. Which one's right? I believe it was the orphanage, but who knows with any of this? It's all fiction anyway. Because again, like I say, when I was actually found was 9 months before I was actually born. So, but what I want to say also, separate documented from reported. So an example of reported is, hey, you know what? I was abandoned behind Seoul City Hall. Documented is, hey, here's a police record or report um, supporting the fact that I was abandoned behind City Hall. So outside of my medical records, um, uh, everything else is just a reported event for me. None of it is documented. So keep original wording where possible. And then what I tell people is to separate your timeline into two sections. The first section is events from your birth to adoption, so like your abandonment, your any time in foster care, when your medical checkups were done and stuff like that. And then events post-adoption, like your naturalization, record search, and birth search, stuff like that. And the reason I'm saying that is because while the TRC is going to be very interested in all of the abuses and human rights violations that happened within the adoption, which basically happened in Korea until the time that you left the country, they're also going to be looking at, hey, what kind of obstruction and deflection were the adoption agencies doing when you were trying to find out this truth about your identity? So I requested my birth records, adoption records, let's say, and they kept fobbing me off 3 or 4 times. Okay, TRC will be very interested in knowing that. So once you've created your timeline, you want to identify any red flags. These red flags will, be about, for me, I had a very precise time and place. So my abandonment was May 9th at 7 a.m., 1974. Or wait, sorry, 1972. So 1972, May 9th at 7 a.m. Very precise. But there are no witness statements. There are no police reports about it. It's literally just one line on my adoption records. That's a bit of a red flag to me because there's nothing supporting that, but it's a very precise time and place of my abandonment. What we found, multiple names or spellings for you or for your birth parents. What we found is that, because of the poor child care, what would happen is sometimes a child would die, and instead of having to start the process all over again, they go, hey, you know what, this person looks sort of similar. We'll just change that person, we'll swap one person for the other one so we can keep the process going and therefore get the money quicker. So that's why that's a bit of a red flag. Sex, birth weight, hospital details. Again, there's boilerplate police reports. I have seen police reports and a few of them about abandonment and stuff, and a lot of them read the same. Basically, very vague on details, except for baby was found in a public place on this date at this time. That's it. And then again, like there's no newspaper notice, neighborhood canvas looking for birth family, no consent form. So if your birth family, let's say your birth mother or somebody else gave you up, relinquished you, but there's no verifiable ID on record of who actually gave you up, that's a bit of a red flag. And then additional ones about your timelines and records. Some key documents are missing. We've talked about that. Your Korean language case study and your English summary don't match, which is why it's so important for you to get to your US or Canadian records. So if there's like wording around, hey, you know what, we need to get this child out of here quickly. It usually indicates that, hey, you know what, they're trying to do this so they can get the money quicker from you. And then, like the orphan hojak was created very early. For me, my orphan hojak was created like 5 days after I went into the Holt adoption program. So, you know, so that's the timelines, the records. Last thing I want to cover before we go into the Q&A is the personal statement. And what I want to say about this is that why is your personal statement so important? A personal statement is basically an overview of your adoption story, pointing out inconsistencies and potential areas for human rights violations. What I tell people is your adoption is not just a story, it's actually a record of some of the illegal acts that were perpetrated against you. Um, and it actually indicates to the investigators where they should start their investigations. So it's great to be able your records and stuff. You send it over. What I in IT, because I work in IT, but I try not to tell people that because then I end up repairing people's laptops. But uh, in IT service management, they have something called DIKW, which is Data Information Knowledge Wisdom. And your records are basically just data. Let me talk you through a bit of an illustration for what the DIKW is. So basically, let's say you're running a business, okay? And 5 of your employees phone in sick today, okay? That is a bit of data. But is 5 employees good? Is 5 employees sick bad? I don't know. And this is where information comes into play. So basically taking that data and putting it within context that isn't normally available by just the data alone. So now if I say, hey, you know what? I have 10 employees and 5 of them are sick. Now, all of a sudden, I know that, hey, this isn't a good thing when half my workforce is phoning in sick that day. So that's information. Knowledge is being able to uh, put some uh, wider context around it and say, hey, you know what? Uh, you know what? Last night I had leaving drinks for one of the employees. We stayed out till 4 a.m. drinking and having fun and wishing this person well. Uh, now all of a sudden I can go, hey, now I know why half of my employees are sick. And then the last one is wisdom, which means I can change things. So maybe I can start asking things and say, maybe I shouldn't have employee leaving drinks on a work night. Uh, so that's DIKW. And basically, your records are data. What your personal statement is doing is giving them the I and K, the information and the knowledge that they wouldn't necessarily have or that they would have to work really hard to get in order to get to the wisdom bit, which is were there human rights that were violated here. So that's the purpose of the personal statement. And basically, uh, I always tell people when they're writing their personal statements, really focus in on where your potential human rights violations were. So basically, for me, there were a number of human rights that I were violated by me. Right to know my birth identity, including my birth name, my birth parents, my birth date. Uh, right to being able to grow up in the culture of my birth, uh, right to be raised in a stable, non-abusive family. All of these things were violated in my life. Okay, so these are things that you want to point out, and it's that last bullet point that I wanted to talk about a bit. The Korean law at the time, and still does, state that there was a duty of care that the Korean government had when placing children internationally. And what they were supposed to do is 6 months after the placement, they were supposed to check in and see, is this a good, successful, quote unquote, placement? Is the child safe and secure? And I have not encountered a single case where that has ever happened. So, but I have encountered a number of cases where the adopted family was very abusive and neglectful, my own case included. So, uh, these are things you want to include in your personal statement. So once you've identified, hey, you know what, these are the violations, you want to start writing your personal statement. And what you want to do is keep it grounded in facts. So, hey, you know what? These are the facts. I was abused on these days. I was, you know, I had these scars when I came to the US. Uh, Present things in a logical order, probably around, you know, you can either do it in a chronological order or a thematic order. So thematic is, you know, I didn't have access to my birth identity at all. I didn't have, I was removed from my birth culture and stuff like that. And then start laying out the facts that support them. And then you need to explain why each issue matters. Like, and some of them are important or self-explanatory, but it's still, you know, for me, not being able to be raised in my birth culture meant that being raised in a foreign culture meant I was always felt alienated, never felt like I belonged anywhere. Some stuff that none of you probably feel at all, but so I felt very displaced growing up as a minority in a very white rural community. So that's so not only were my rights violated, but here's the impact of those violations. Okay. You also want to avoid speculation and exaggeration. So basically, you want to say, hey, you know what? I think this police officer was working with the adoption agency and getting kickbacks. Unless you have evidence of that, avoid speculation. But state the facts, and the TRC will be able to make the connections if there are connections there. And then end with specific requests or goals, which is basically I want you to identify that my human rights were violated. I want to, you know, basically uh, have restoration to or with my birth family, stuff like that. So this is where you say, this is what I want as a result of this uh, submission and review. Bearing in mind that the TRC cannot give you any restitution, and they can't, uh, you know, they've got, they're basically there to find out the truth, not to make amends. And then the final slide that I'm going to cover is just some general tips for you when writing your personal statement. You want to quote key passages from your records or supporting documents. So, like for myself, in my personal statement, see this picture when I first came to the US, so you can see the scars on my wrists that were bandaged. You want to cite page numbers and dates. So basically, you say, hey, you know what? My orphan Hojak was created on April 4th. Great, but it takes the investigator a lot of effort to try to find where your orphan Hojak is actually contained. So you could say, hey, you know what? In my Freedom of Information Act, page 56 is a copy of my orphan Hojak. You can see that it's dated May 5th, which is 2 days after I was found abandoned. Okay, so that's what you want to do. Again, distinguish facts from interpretation. So you don't want to assign motives for people. You know, you don't want to say, hey, you know what, the adoption agency was trying to get me through the process in order to make money off me quicker. That might be the case, but that's your interpretation. There is most likely no documentation that supports that supposition, but the TRC will be able to look at the broader patterns and say, hey, this is what happened. And then what I tell people is that adjectives are very emotive, so you want to avoid using them. And so you want to use neutral and professional language. In some of the personal statements that I've reviewed, some of them have come across as very angry, and I can understand that. But the thing is you don't want to come across like you have an axe to grind. Instead, you want to say, hey, you know what? I suspect my human rights are violated. I want you to be able to investigate and confirm or deny that. So that's all I have for the actual presentation, and then we can go to Q&A.